Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for Izumo no Okuni. She's a limited 5-star caster introduced in Gura Gura Close Call, or, going by its NA title, Ryoma's Narrow Escape. She marks a strange milestone in FGO's history, our very first quick caster. That's right. In all these years, that's one of the few things we've never had. But being a quick servant puts Okuni in a very precarious position. Does she have the X factor to stand out like Samaroki-tan, or is she perhaps a bit more old school? Let's find out. Leading off Okuni's skill set is Combat Dance. This is a 3-turn quick and buster hybrid buff that comes with a 2-hit evasion. That's quite a package, but it comes at a price. A 7-turn cooldown. That's steep, and it's one of the reasons why I kind of wince whenever I see one of these double-sided steroid/protection effects. You have to commit to using both at the same time, and unless you know you need the extra safety net, you generally prioritize getting the fight off to a quick start. Yeah, the hit-based effect helps a little bit, but still, relative to the cooldown, that's kind of rough. This is an area where Okuni plays into the quick card type's weakness. Neither version of Skadi is exceptionally good at keeping her alive. The vanilla version has Gate of Sky, but it's way more of a pain to keep it available than something like a Round Caliburn. So you may need to pack an appropriate Mystic Code or give Skadi a K-Scope, which is rough for an entirely different reason, but we'll get back to that. Next up, let's take a look at Puppet Kagura. It's a single-turn star absorption and crit damage buff. For that turn, it applies a non-hit buff that reduces your target's defense every time Okuni crits them. This debuff lasts for 3 turns, which is some good news at least. Otherwise, the buffs being single turn is a huge pain. If you use Okuni with Vanilla Skadi, I'd recommend keeping a Star Absorption command code like Ms. Majin, just to make sure you don't get screwed on turns where Puppet Kagura isn't available. I'll also note that outside of this skill's debuff, Okuni has nothing affecting the attack part of the damage formula. This becomes less of an issue once Ruler Skadi comes out, but the regular version doesn't have any help on that front. So consider Golden Sumo to give you a shot in the arm in the meantime. For long-term usage though, Black Rail is going to be your bread and butter as per usual. You can also end up in a very unflattering situation where you're forced to choose a full face guard Brave Chain while sitting on a full Noble Phantasm, or incorporate her NP while losing the crit damage and on-hit effect of her third guard. Okuni is not the kind of servant you'd run solo, which means your Brave Chain access is inconsistent. In other words, try to keep tabs on your card draw cycles, and if you haven't seen the bulk of her cards by turn 2 of a cycle, try to offload her Noble Phantasm before you draw those cards. If it makes you feel better though, this choice becomes a lot less painful with the Mighty Chain update, where putting a quick NP first in your chain is often the ideal arrangement, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. The card RNG affecting this skill is a big reason to run a Stardom CE like Golden Catches the Carp on your Vanilla Skadi, so you can get a big start if you draw all of Okuni's cards on turn 1. Ruler Skadi has one baked into her kit, so that's not an issue, but having to choose between Carp and K-Scope for regular Skadi does limit your options, so adjust depending on your defensive needs. The last of Okuni's regular skills is Sealing Shrine Maiden. This is the glue that holds her together. It's a 50% battery and stardom for her, but it also doubles as a targeted single-turn cooldown reduction effect. Now you may think about saving it for a clutch assist, but realistically speaking, Okuni's gonna be your main target. The reason is twofold. Firstly, Okuni has almost nothing else in her kit that lends itself to a supportive role, so in practice you'd only have Skadis to pick from. Secondly, Okuni needs it way more. Both this and Combat Dance have lengthy 7-turn cooldowns, which only become passable when she targets herself with Sealing Shrine Maiden. So instead of having this cooldown reduction being a flexible tool, it's quite the opposite. Okuni needs it just to stay on par. But a 50% battery is still nothing to sneeze at, so let's see what it unlocks. Izumo no Okuni's Noble Phantasm is the Okuni Special, Izumo Aragami Kabuki. This is a single target quick attack that applies a preemptive quick debuff. If you can stick on the same enemy, you can ramp up her damage. It overcharges damage against demonic enemies. Being an anti-demonic caster makes her a mortal threat to one of FGO's most persistent enemies, the placeholder Giant Ghost. Ghosts in general typically appear in the Assassin class, so you can expect quite a few wins on this front. The Giant variety can deviate, but assuming they're not a rider, you could probably still mess them up. As far as servants go, there are a handful of relevant targets. Both Shutendoji and Consort Yu appear in the main story, so you might get some mileage if you haven't completed their respective chapters yet. For a curiosity, I'll note that Okuni has an anti-pretender pen skill. It's not a terribly relevant effect, so I wouldn't unlock it, but it does hypothetically let her bully Summer Baobin Shi in combination with her anti-demonic effect. The big game you're hunting though is Koyanskaya. All of her variants are demonic, so between Okuni's special damage and caster class, she may come in handy at the end of this year when Tunguska Sanctuary drops. Being a caster isn't all upside though. Despite Okuni having one of the highest caster attack stats, she's hobbled, like all of her peers, by the dreaded caster class multiplier. Just for the temerity of being a spellcaster, casters lose around 10% of their base damage, and this means that any offensive caster needs to bring something big to the table, like a 100% battery or killing your friends for power. Okuni is quick and kills demonic shit. The latter is a niche she has competition in, from Onikira and Murasaki. Okuni might be the best at killing single demons among these, but that's not the most convincing sales pitch. As for the quick part, well, once upon a time there was this annoying fight in Benyenma's New Year's event. You had to fight 3 monkeys that each had a different class and a card type weakness. There was an assassin monkey which was only weak to quick cards. Yeah, we had berserkers for that, but I remember thinking, man, if only there were a quick caster I could use. That was the first and last time I thought specifically, a quick caster is what I need. And I think that's the perfect way of describing how good she is. Too little, too late. The combination of being an attacker with cooldown reduction and the first quick caster seems at first glance like Okuni embracing the weird, experimental style of some quick servants, where they get powerful tools to compensate for them being in a weaker card type. But once you look under the surface, she's a lot more like the old breed, overbalanced for no reason, like Voyager or Mysterious Idol Exalter. Izumo no Okuni is, quite contrary to her character, a watered-down half measure, one I can't recommend. But what exactly is her character? Well, that brings us to her history. Fair warning that I'm not a proper historian, but here's what I know. Okuni was born at a watershed in Japanese history, the dividing line between the Sengoku period, the chaotic, blood-stained days of Nobunaga and Hideyoshi, and the rigid stability of the Tokugawa shogunate. By the way, her name means Okuni of Izumo, Izumo being the province she's from. So think of her like Ryu, from Streets. And speaking of streets, she was a shrine maiden who traveled the land to raise money for said shrine. How did she raise money? Well, she danced out in the open. I'd imagine much like a street performer would today. She even picked a dry riverbed for some of her more notable performances. But Okuni wasn't satisfied with just dancing. She wanted to spice up her act, so she gathered up prostitutes and other misfits off the street and told them, "Hey, want to make money without the syphilis? I got you." So if they didn't already know, she taught them how to dance, sing, play instruments, and act. At this point, you might be wondering whether a priestess consorting with the lowest rung of society might cause problems. But you see, the Sengoku period was a terrible time to take up the cloth. Funding for shrines dried up as the various local economies geared up for nearly continuous warfare, and anyone with the funds to do something about it was adversely affected by said warfare. So with local shrines falling into greater disrepair, their staff took to the roads and began selling their company, among other things. Whether Okuni herself was engaged in the practice isn't clear, but the point is that the line between priestess and prostitute wasn't all that clear either, so she wouldn't have been rocking the boat too much with her choice of company. What did raise eyebrows was the content of her performances. She had a troupe consisting entirely of women, and some of them would cross-dress to fill male roles in their plays. They did parodies of religion, history, and everyday occurrences with a big dose of the salacious and scandalous. These were performed with an irreverence and swagger that was quite appealing to all sections of the public, who came for cheap thrills and sometimes in hopes of wooing one of the performers. Everyone was happy. Well, almost everyone. The stuffed shirts, or perhaps I should say the tightened sashes of the shogunate, were none too pleased. You see, the Tokugawa shogunate was still trying to consolidate its control over the recently pacified Japan, and they saw kabuki as a threat in 2 dimensions. Firstly, the mixing of the classes at these performances would contradict their attempts to create a rigid caste system where the samurai, merchants, peasants, and undesirables stayed in their own lanes. Secondly, they were wary of moral decay. These flashy, erotic, and irreverent acts put on by prostitutes struck them as a potential source of rot. I don't have a reason to believe they saw Okuni herself as a particularly notable threat, but what did catch their attention were the many imitators that came in her wake. Many of these would explicitly loop prostitution back into the equation, and they were even more keen on pushing the limits on what they could get away with. Finally, the shogunate had enough and banned women from performing this decadent art form altogether. But then young men took up these vacant roles and put them right back at square one. Eventually, the shogunate restricted the talent pool to older men, which apparently produced something more to their satisfaction. It was in this form, far more restrained than Okuni's performances of old, that kabuki would proceed through the years. Okuni herself would simply vanish from the historical record, perhaps because she saw where the political winds were blowing. It wasn't until the 20th century, some years after the American occupation banned and then unbanned the art form, that we would once again see women take up kabuki. Lastly, let's talk about the big metal suit of armor in the room. Its namesake is Nagoya Sanzaburo, a samurai who was allegedly Okuni's lover. Years after his death in a fight with one of his peers, Okuni would beckon the ghost of Sanzaburo into her performances, and he, or rather an actress taking his role, would step onto the stage with regularity, allowing the two to dance and banter long after his passing. Thanks for watching. Like if you enjoyed this guide/story, subscribe for more, and come watch me stream. Links down in the description. I go from Friday through Sunday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. This Sunday in particular, I'll be rolling for Izumo no Okuni and rocking my way through Ryoma's narrow escape. So stop on by for a good time. See you there.